John Irving es uno de mis autores favoritos, lo ha sido desde por lo menos los años 80. Algunos de sus libros son El Mundo según Garp, también The Cider House Rules, que aquí en México, en la lengua española, se le puso los príncipes, los señores de Nueva Inglaterra, los príncipes de Maine, si no me acuerdo mal del título que se le puso. Él acaba de publicar una nueva novela, la novela es publicada en español por Tusquets, se llama Avenida de los Misterios. Pero lo más interesante, quizás a usted le llame la atención, es que las primeras escenas, una parte muy significativa de la novela, tiene lugar en Oaxaca. Mr. Irving, thank you very much for speaking with me. Why did you decide? I mean, I've always thought of you of a writer who puts his novels in New England, and all of a sudden I start reading a book of yours, and it starts in Oaxaca, not only in Oaxaca, but in a basurero, in a dump. Why?
It's unfortunately not a short answer.
That's right.
Because for 20 years this was a screenplay before it became a novel. And for the first 7 years of his life, it was set in India, in an orphanage in Mumbai, about children who are adopted by an Indian circus. But the director and I couldn't get the film made in India, so we came for the first time to Oaxaca in 1997 and relocated, still a movie, not a novel, relocated this story there. Everything from the beginning worked better. The Catholic Church, of course, is a much bigger presence in Mexico than it has managed to become in India. And we found in those children who worked in the circus, as in India, children from poor circumstances who arguably have chances for a better life in the circus than they would have had where they came from. We found in the basurero a suitable background for our circus children, our orphans in an orphanage I called Niños Perdidos. These Niños de la Basura, these children who work in the basurero, became the children who the Jesuits try to take care of. And then they end up in a Mexican circus. But the principal characters were always the same. There was always a well-meaning but kind of bungling American missionary who turns out to be gay, who falls in love with a transgender woman, who tries to rescue these children. There was always a good Jesuit brother. The story went through all these changes. Many trips to Oaxaca, 97, 2002, 2003, 2008, 2009, 2014. It was only here in Mexico when we were returning from a circus outside Mexico City between Christmas and New Year's, 2008, 2009, that I thought, I should write this as a novel first before we make it a movie. The director was not happy to hear this. But,
I can imagine.
but I'm glad I did. And so it became a novel in early 2009 when I decided, for me, often the difference between something I see as a film or something I see as a novel has everything to do with the passage of time. And the movie was only the story of these children in 1 year, when Juan Diego is 14 and his sister Lupe is 13. Just narrow window of time. But I thought, wouldn't we know more about him if we saw him 40 years after that childhood? If we met him again when he's on his way to the Philippines and has lived in the United States, not very happily, for 40 years, because he's going to make good on a promise he made to an American draft dodger he met in Oaxaca in 1970. Yes.
Yeah. Once again, the narrator is a writer like you. I mean, you've actually done that many times in your life, but in this case, he is a Mexican American, or rather, he's a Mexican or an American,
Or-
depending. Yeah,
yes.
because he said
He doesn't like the Mexican-American.
Yes.
He is a Mexican-American, but he doesn't like the categorization. He doesn't like being labeled in this way, compartmentalized in this way. I understand why he feels that way.
you don't like being compartmentalized. You yourself as a writer.
Well, not only. It's sometimes the way it's said is a way of putting you in a niche, in a place. No, I think it's different to be called a writer, un escritor. I think Juan Diego would not mind being called a writer, but he objects to the Mexican-American modifier, just the way people in the LGBT community would, you know, if my friends who are gay or lesbian, they don't want to be called a gay writer or a lesbian writer.
You want to be a writer, period.
I never cared when I was trying to write my first novels. I never cared about this crazy idea that's called the great American novel. I don't call myself an American novelist. I want to be a good novelist. I want to be a novelist. But the nationality of it seems to me to diminish.
You
what
actually
you
now
do.
live in Canada. I always thought of you as a New England writer, but now you live in Canada. Why?
Well, my wife is Canadian.
Oh, well, that helps.
And she came to live in the United States for 18 years. She left her home to live in the U.S., which was our primary residence, for a long time. But I've lived in Canada as much as 4 or 5 months of the year for 30 years now. I only became a full-time resident of Canada in 2015.
I really loved your character, Lupe, the girl who can see the future, who
Yes.
can't be understood by anyone except her brother, but who can read people's minds. Tell us about Lupe.
Well, I'm attracted to these characters who are clairvoyant. Owen Meany was such a character earlier. Another, would you say, novela milagro, a miracle novel?
Yeah, novela de milagros.
Yeah, another miracle novel like this one. I'm attracted to these always young people who believe they know what's going to happen. It puts a terrible weight on them, a terrible burden. It must be, especially if you're young, if you think you know the future, of course you might be tempted to change it. And that's kind of the tragedy of Lupe's story. We'll never know even if she was right. Even her brother says, well, she's better at the past than she is at the future. She's better at reading your mind and knowing what has happened to you than she is necessarily good at guessing what's going to happen. But that's the story, yeah.
You perfectly know, because you know our country, you know Mexicans, that we are afraid of the new President Donald Trump. You've actually
Me
written-
too.
You're also afraid of him. Tell us, what do you think? What's the message we're getting from American voters with this election?
Well, I wrote about this.
That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, I wrote about this. It's translated both in Spanish in two translations. It's in El País,
El
it's
País in
seen
Spain, yeah.
and also here on Sin Embargo. Well, I think the message, sadly, is from the non-voters. The most disappointing message to me from the U.S. is the message sent by the people who didn't vote. Mr. Trump didn't get as many votes in 2016 as Romney in 2012. Trump didn't get as many votes as McCain in 2008. Trump would have lost to Obama in 2008 or 2012.
Hillary got
by a
5
big-
million votes less than
Hillary
Obama.
got 6.5 million votes less than Obama. So that tells me that my fellow liberal Democrats, I blame them for this election because they were too fussy. Maybe they wanted Bernie. Maybe the African Americans who had supported Obama, well, they were indifferent to these two candidates. Maybe there were a lot of people, I know there were a lot of people, who didn't like Trump, and they didn't like Hillary either, and so they thought they'd be superior to the process and stay home. I blame those people because 6.5 million people who showed up for Obama did not show up for Hillary. That's why Trump is president. Even so, Hillary beat him in the popular vote. So it doesn't tell us that a great number of people supported Trump. It tells me that many of my fellow liberal Democrats were just lazy or apathetic or stupid, and they didn't vote. It's happened before that my party has shot itself in an election. We didn't like Humphrey in '68. His policies were too close to Johnson. And because of those Democrats who didn't support Humphrey,
Nixon was elected.
we got Nixon. And what did that mean? 7 more years of the war in Vietnam. If there's anything hopeful to say about this election, it's only this. It seems to me that every younger generation needs a wake-up call. My generation, the Vietnam generation, needed one. We were very apathetic and detached from the political process until they sent half of my friends to Vietnam and they died there. We needed something awful to happen to realize, oh, you have to take part. A rule of a democracy is you have to participate. You have to be a participant, right? Well, I'm hoping that this generation, ages 18 to 25, maybe they learned something. If you don't show up, if you don't participate, right, this is what you get. Because that generation is going to be hurt the most by 4 years of Republicans in the White House. And I know because Trump is such a loudmouth, such a bully, such a vulgarian, that he attracts all the attention. The vice president-elect, Mike Pence, he's worse. He has a real conservative agenda. Trump is just another corrupt businessman.
John Irving, author of Avenida de los Misterios. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Y a usted, amigo televidente, que hace posible este programa, se lo agradezco también. Esto es todo por hoy, pero no se lo olvide. Nos vemos la próxima.